Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 4th Liverpool Literary Festival. And it's an event of a very different kind this year. It's been a joy to welcome lovers of literature to our wonderful campus every October, and we hope to be able to do that again very soon. But for now, whether you are joining us on Zoom or watching live on Facebook, we hope that you found a comfortable, cozy spot and that our writers will transport you as only great literature can. So please make yourself comfortable, for our first brilliant event is about to begin. And I'm going to hand over now to our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Dame Janet Beer, to introduce our first speaker, Carol Ann Duffy. Thank you.
Dinah, thank you very much. And let me add my welcome to Dinah's, to all our viewers and listeners this evening. It gives me huge pleasure to introduce Dame Carol Ann Duffy to you this evening. You will all know that Carol Ann was the first woman poet laureate in this country from 2009 to 2019. There are many, many reasons why Carol Ann is special to us in Liverpool and special to me personally, but her first reason for specialness is that she is an alumna of the University of Liverpool, graduating in philosophy in 1977. And in 1996, when I was the head of the newly established Department of English at Manchester Metropolitan University, one of my first acts as head of department was to appoint Carol Ann Duffy to the newly established writing school. And that writing school continues to flourish today under Carol Ann's leadership and is doing an amazing work both in the university and in the local community. Carol Ann's first collection, Standing Female Nude, was published in 1985, and that has been followed by numerous volumes of plays, poetry, opera, anthologies, children's books, and much else. It goes without saying that Carol Ann cares deeply about literature, about communicating the power of language, of poetry, of the lyric. She cares about that deeply, but she also cares about people. She cares about community. And it is pretty impossible to overpraise her. So I am proud. I'm proud to have been her colleague and to still regard myself as her colleague, but also as her friend. And I would now like to invite Carol Ann Duffy to read for us.
Thank you so much, Janet. It's such a disappointment that I have to be doing this at home. I was so looking forward, out of all the diary commitments for this year, to coming to Liverpool, probably one of my favourite English cities. As Janet said, I went to university and lived for over a decade. And it's where I misspent my youth and still have many people I love there and support Liverpool. So it's very much in my heart. I thought I'd read from the most recent book first I published, Sincerity, and then perhaps dip in and out of earlier collections. And Sincerity is a kind of touchstone word for the poems in that book. It derives from the Greek, meaning without wax. And I believe that in ancient Greece, when sculptors made errors in their work, they would fraudulently conceal these errors by putting wax over the statues. So without wax is more truthful, more honest. And in these poems, which are often very personal, but sometimes public or public in the way that the personal, whether you like it or not, becomes entangled in the public. And the very first poem in the collection is called Clerk of Hearts. And I think in this poem, I'm considering the vocation or the role of the poet throughout time, something that I feel very connected with as a poet myself. I have the sense of being in a long line of poets, all pretty much doing the same work. Clerk of Hearts. As they step from the path onto the boats, I am there at my place under the trees, listing the categories: humility, shame. My dealings with life have been so long ago. I imagine I resemble shadow or watermark. I am unanswered prayer, like poetry, dread. Whatever I did, it might have been that. Now I watch each one depart, perceive their hearts. Old diaries I read at a glance, acceptance, disdain. They will forget, but I take time, devoted, clerk of hearts. Sometimes I stand on the bridge as they drift away, being more and more dead. A kingfisher arrowing upriver, joy as colour, then thunder above, a boiling of last words, and their crafts vanishing into the heavy rain. Elephants. When I was small, I saw the circus elephants on Blackpool sands, a slow line of extraordinary sadness. An elephant holds more anguish than a man. We should not see them, except where they choose to be, in their grey empathies, their bulked knowledge. They walk unsung, gravity's grave clergy. They're perfect for the earth, its emigrant distances, its pooled waters. If the gods were to gaze at this world, they would hazard elephants. Over the lockdown, we seem to be going into another 6 months of the same. I've been completing an anthology called Empty Nest, which will come out in February. And these are poems dealing with that moment when our children selfishly leave home and start their own lives. And the idea for compiling an anthology came from a poem I myself wrote when my daughter went to university. And I think if we have children, it's one of those big lifetime events that perhaps doesn't get talked about much. We're quite stoical about this passing of our children into adulthood. Empty nest. Dear child, the house pines when you leave. I research whether there is any bird who grieves over its empty nest. Your vacant room is a still life framed by the unclosed door, read by sunlight, an open book on the floor. I fold the laundry, hang your flower dress in darkness, forget-me-nots. Beyond the tall fence, I hear horse chestnuts counting themselves, then autumn, Christmas. You come and go singing, then ice, snowdrops. Our home hides its face in hands of silence. I knew mothering, but not this other thing which hefts my heart each day, heavier. Now I know. This is the shy sorrow. It will not speak up. I play one chord on the piano. It vanishes, tactful, as dusk muffles the garden, a magpie staring from its branch, the marble girl standing by the bench. From the local church, bells like a spelling, and the evening star like a text. And then what next? One of my favourite artists is Tracy Emin, and this next poem is dedicated to her. And I wrote it when she announced that she'd married a stone in her garden in France. She'd had a private marriage ceremony and married a very ancient tall stone that she'd found on her property. And yes, of course, she received much ridicule in the English tabloids for this, but I was very moved by this, if you like, piece of performance art. And it seemed to me a statement not only of her commitment to her art, but a kind of courage and embrace of being solitary. I think she took the title of the exhibition that she referenced this in from David Bowie. So this title might well be from David Bowie. Stone Love. I married a tall, dark, handsome stone in its lichen suit, sacred the ceremony above the sea, where the stone had stood for 1,000,000 years, stoic, bridegroom, till I came at last to the wedding day. Gulls laughed in a blue marquee of air. Shroud for a dress, barefoot me, my vows, my business, and the stones. But should you ever press your face to a stone's old, cold, still breast, you'll find the words which spliced me there to the silence of stone, till death, slow art of stone, staunchness of stone, do us part. My hand on what I take from time and this world, and the stone's shadow there on the grass with mine. So before I went to Liverpool University, I lived just down the M6 in Stafford, Junction 13, a very quiet sort of little market town. And I wanted to revisit the sense you have as a kind of teenager of waiting for life to begin. So this is little fragments of memories about those years. Junction 13. There was nothing to do, so we hitched to the airport 10 years early for the flight. Wore love bites. Nothing going on, so a youth noosed 6 school ties round a horse, as it fled up the new M6, timed each kiss. What else but roll the snow up and down the estate to a grubby moon, a name on a metal cone, or move in bored pairs through the harvest festival tent, switching the prizes. It was all prose, nada, sat on hot leather seats in the back of a Ford Cortina. Are we nearly there yet? Not yet. Not yet. Nothing. Pocket dictionaries with snide words highlighted in pink. Prick, ejaculate, ball, played tennis with a wall. There was nothing to do but limp for no reason, speak in foreign accents to strangers. Sunglasses made you famous. Nothing happening. All summer in the spinney, building a bonfire we were never permitted to light, and everyone white. What else but smoke tea in a graveyard, steal the flowers for our mothers, get scalped for it, bedtime in daylight, or hide in the wardrobe. No one was looking for you, or tell lies without purpose. Walk home, trying out blindness. Zilch. The world was not here. It flowed away under the motorway bridge, the world. It roared past the platform. This is just where you start from. I watched a bit of the you can hardly call it a debate, the presidential thing the other night. And I don't know, a combination of horror and murderous despair. And it reminded me of a poem I wrote, which is Insincerity, based on a true incident. I think I'd been to do some poetry readings in Germany, and for some reason I ended up at Berlin Zoo. And this is the result of that. Gorilla. It was at Berlin Zoo, don't ask, where I came face to thick glass with a gorilla. We stared each other out. Its eyes were smashed rage under a pelmet of wrath. Its nose, 2 boxing gloves. Its mouth, an unliftable curse. I wished it were free. Down on the equatorial belt, chilling to Morrissey. With a day's more evolution, it could even be president. So I'm going to put aside sincerity just for a moment and go to some earlier poems. I thought I'd read a handful from a collection called The World's Wife, which I wrote, gosh, decades ago now, it must be. 1997 maybe. And I had great fun writing these poems. I took all the characters and stories from my childhood, from my school days that I'd loved and that had always stayed with me and become part of, I suppose, the writer that I am. So characters from fairy tale or mythology or history or the Bible, sometimes from movies. And I wanted to celebrate all of this education, if you like, but also see if I could find something fresh in what was very familiar or be subversive. And my key to doing that was finding female voices that perhaps weren't audible or considered in the original stories. And that kind of story length, some of them, so a little longer than a short lyric poem. So you could maybe pour a glass of wine and close your eyes and listen to this, perhaps. And the very first one was Midas, here, Mrs. Midas, from Ovid's wonderful book, Metamorphoses, where everything and everyone is subject to magical transformation. And he, of course, had the ability to turn everything that he touched into gold. It was late September. I just poured a glass of wine, begun to unwind while the vegetables cooked. The kitchen filled with the smell of itself, relaxed, its steamy breath gently blanching the windows. So I opened one, then with my fingers wiped the other's glass like a brow. He was standing under the pear tree, snapping a twig. Now, the garden was long and the visibility poor, the way the dark of the ground seems to drink the light of the sky. But that twig in his hand was gold. And then he plucked a pear from a branch. We grew fondant d'automne, and it sat in his palm like a light bulb, on. I thought to myself, is he putting fairy lights in that tree? He came into the house. The doorknobs gleamed. He drew the blinds. You know the mind. I thought of the field of the cloth of gold and of Miss Macready. He sat in that chair like a king on a burnished throne. The look on his face was strange, wild, vain. I said, what in the name of God is going on? He started to laugh. I served up the meal. For starters, corn on the cob. Within seconds, he was spitting out the teeth of the rich. He toyed with his spoon, then mine, then with the knives, the forks. He asked where was the wine. I poured with a shaking hand, a fragrant, bone-dry white from Italy, then watched as he picked up the glass, goblet, golden chalice, drank. It was then that I started to scream. He sank to his knees. After we'd both calmed down, I finished the wine on my own, hearing him out. I made him sit on the other side of the room, keep his hands to himself. I locked the cat in the cellar. I moved the phone. The toilet I didn't mind. I couldn't believe my ears, how he'd had a wish. Look, we all have wishes, granted. But who has wishes granted? Him. Do you know about gold? It feeds no one. Aurum, soft, untarnishable, slakes no thirst. He tried to light a cigarette. I gazed entranced as the blue flame played on its luteous stem. At least, I said, you'll be able to give up smoking for good. Separate beds. In fact, I put a chair against my door near Petrified. He was below, turning the spare room into the tomb of Tutankhamun. You see, we were passionate then, in those halcyon days, unwrapping each other rapidly like presents, fast food. But now I feared his honeyed embrace, the kiss that would turn my lips to a work of art. And who, when it comes to the crunch, can live with a heart of gold? That night, I dreamt I bore his child, its perfect all limbs, its little tongue like a precious latch, its amber eyes holding their pupils like flies. My dream milk burned in my breasts. I woke to the streaming sun. So he had to move out. We'd a caravan in the wilds, in a glade of its own. I drove him up under cover of dark. He sat in the back. And then I came home, the woman who married the fool who wished for gold. At first I visited, odd times, parking the car a good way off, then walking. You knew you were getting close. Golden trout on the grass. One day a hare hung from a latch, a beautiful lemon mistake, and then his footprint glistening next to the river's path. He was thin, delirious, hearing, he said, the music of Pan from the woods. Listen, that was the last straw. What gets me now is not the idiocy or greed, but lack of thought for me, pure selfishness. I sold the contents of the house and came down here. I think of him in certain lights, dawn, late afternoon, and once a bowl of apples stopped me dead. I miss most, even now, his hands, his warm hands on my skin, his touch. And another book that figured largely in my childhood and school days, as well as Metamorphoses, was Esop's Fables. Particularly, I remember in what's now year 6, and at the end of the day, we would sit on the carpet, and our teacher would send us home with a fable by Esop. And like most children, I loved stories with animals in, but always felt very let down or puzzled by Esop's fables. And looking back, I think it was the moral touch on the end, which I could never quite understand. So as an adult writer, I became fascinated in the amount of cliche, as you'll hear, that Esop left behind, even in translation. So I thought I'd revisit these and try and find out about him. Couldn't find out much. Although he was a slave, he was famous for these fables, and he was also apparently picked on because of his height. So yes, an unfortunate life, I think, but this talent made him famous. And there are well over 300 fables. Everything in the poem is by Esop, but the poem could have gone on forever, like knitting. I couldn't reference 300 plus stories, so I exit the poem by making use of the infamous Bobbit case, which seemed to me Aesopian in its ending. And if you don't know the Bobbit case, you can Google it afterwards. Mrs. Esop. By Christ, he could bore for purgatory. He was small, didn't prepossess, so he tried to impress. Dead men, Mrs. Esop, he'd say, tell no tales. Well, let me tell you now that bird in his hand shat on his sleeve. Never mind the 2 worth less in the bush. Tedious. Going out was worst. He'd stand at our gate, look, then leap. Scour the hedgerows for a shy mouse, the fields for a sly fox, the sky for one particular swallow that couldn't make a summer. The jackdaw, according to him, envied the eagle. Donkeys would, on the whole, prefer to be lions. On one appalling evening stroll, we passed an old hare snoozing in a ditch. He stopped and made a note. And then, about a mile further on, a tortoise, somebody's pet, creeping slow as marriage up the road. Slow but certain, Mrs. Esop wins the race. Asshole. What race? What sour grapes? What silk-pursed, sow's-eared dog in a manger? What big fish? Some days I could barely keep awake because the story droned on towards the moral of itself. Action, Mrs. A, speaks louder than words. And that's another thing. The sex was diabolical. I gave him a fable one night about a little cock that wouldn't crow, a razor-sharp axe with a heart blacker than that pot that called the kettle. I'll cut off your tail, all right, I said, says I, to save my face. That shut him up. I laughed last, longest. And I'll read one more from The World's Wife, and this is probably my favourite of all these old stories, the story of Faust. And you remember that Faust sold his soul to the devil, and in return he was to receive I think quarter of a century of unimaginable power and wealth. He could have anything he wanted. He could time travel. He could do magic. Nothing was to be denied, but at the end he must pay with his soul. So here's the equally unpleasant Mrs. Faust telling the story here. And she met Faust when they were both students at university. I regret to say at the University of Liverpool. And after a kind of on-off, up-down courtship, she quite pragmatically thought she would back this horse and marry him. She's very materialistic, a big consumer, is Mrs. Faust. I have been thinking of retitling the poem The Third Mrs. Trump. We'll see. First things first, I married Faust. We met as students, shacked up, split up, made up, hitched up, got a mortgage on a house, flourished academically, BA, MA, PhD, no kids. 2 toweled bathrobes, hers, his. We worked, we saved. We moved again, fast cars, a boat with sails, a second home in Wales, the latest toys, computers, smartphones. We prospered, moved again. Fast face, clever, greedy, slightly mad. I was as bad. I grew to love the lifestyle, not the life. He grew to love the kudos, not the wife. He went to whores. I felt not jealousy, but chronic irritation. I went to yoga, tai chi, feng shui, therapy, colonic irrigation. And Faust would boast at dinner parties of the cost of doing deals out east, then take his lust to Soho in a cab, to say the least, to lay the ghost, get lost, meet panthers, feast. He wanted more. I came home late one winter's evening, hadn't eaten. Faust was upstairs in his study in a meeting. I smelled cigar smoke, hellish, oddly sexy, not allowed. I heard Faust and the other laugh aloud. Next thing, the world, as Faust said, spread its legs. First, politics, safe seat, MP, right Hon, KG, then banks, offshore, abroad, then business, vice chairman, chairman, owner, lord, enough? Encore. Faust was cardinal, pope, knew more than God, flew faster than the speed of sound around the globe, lunched, walked on the moon, golfed, holed in one, lit a fat Havana on the sun. Then he backed a hunch, invested in smart bombs, in harms. Faust dealt in arms. Faust got in deep, got out, bought farms, cloned sheep. Faust surfed the internet for like-minded Bo Peep. As for me, I went my own sweet way, Saw Rome in a day, spun gold from hay. Had a facelift, had my breast enlarged, my buttocks tightened. Went to China, Thailand, Africa, returned, enlightened. Turned 40, celibate, teetotal, vegan, Buddhist. 41, went blonde, went redhead, went brunette, went native, went ape, went berserk, went bananas, went on the run alone. Went home. Fast was in. A word, he said. I spent the night being pleasured by a virtual Helen of Troy. Face that launched 1,000 ships. I kissed its lips. Thing is, I've made a pact with Mephistopheles, the devil's boy. He's on his way to take away what's owed, reap what I sowed. For all these years of gagging for it, going for it, rolling in it, I've sold my soul. At this, I heard a serpent hiss, tasted evil, knew its smell. As scaly devil hands poked up, right through the terracotta Tuscan tiles at Faust's bare feet, and dragged him, oddly smirking, there and then straight down to hell. Oh well. Faust Will left everything, the yacht, the several homes, the Learjet, the helipad, the loot, etc., the lot to me. C'est la vie. When I got ill, it hurt like hell. I bought a kidney with my credit card. Then I got well. I keep Faust's secret still. The clever, cunning, callous bastard didn't have a soul to sell. Nope. So a little sip of my coffee. I'd like to move to another collection called Rapture and read just a few from that book. Rapture is 52 love poems, pretty much based on the sonnet form, or breaking the sonnet form, to tell the story of a love affair from its beginnings through all its events to its ending. And because I wanted each poem to focus only on the moment that provoked the poem, I, by and large, just gave them one-word titles. So I'll read, say, 4 of these. I won't introduce the poems individually, but I will read them in order of the narrative. Text. I tend the mobile now, like an injured bird. We text are significant words. I reread your first, your second, your third. Look for your small XX, feeling absurd. The codes we send arrive with a broken chord. I try to picture your hands. Their image is blurred. And nothing my thumbs press will ever be heard. Tea. I like pouring your tea, lifting the heavy pot and tipping it up so the fragrant liquid steams in your china cup. Or when you're away or at work, I like to think of your cupped hands as you sip, of the faint half smile of your lips. I like the questions, sugar, milk, and the answers I don't know by heart yet, for I see your soul in your eyes, and I forget. Jasmine, gunpowder, Assam, Earl Grey, Ceylon. I love tea's names. Which tea would you like, I say? But it's any tea for you, please, any time of day. As the women harvest the slopes for the sweetest leaves on Mount Wu Yi, and I am your lover, smitten, straining your tea. Row. But when we rowed, the room swayed and sank down on its knees. The air hurt and purpled like a bruise. The sun banged the gate in the sky and fled. But when we rowed, the trees wept and threw away their leaves. The day ripped the hours from our lives. The sheets and pillows shredded themselves on the bed. But when we rowed, our mouths knew no kiss, no kiss. Our hearts were jagged stones in our fists. The garden sprouted bones grown from the dead. But when we rowed, your face blanked, a page erased of words. My hands squeezed themselves, burned like verbs. Love turned and ran and cowered in our heads. And the last one from Rapture, art. Only art now, our bodies, brushstroke, pigment, motif. Our story, figment, suspension of disbelief. The thrum of our blood, percussion, chords minor for the music of our grief. Art, the chiseled, chilling marble of our kiss. Locked into soundless stone our promises, or fizzled into poems, page print for the dried flowers of our voice. No choice for love, but art's long illness, death. Huge theatres for the echoes that we left. Applause, then utter dark. Grand opera for the passion of our breath. And the Oscar-winning movie in your heart, and where my soul sang, croaking, art. I'm fine now. One of the things I found, I'm sure everyone feels the same, most difficult of lockdown has been not being part of the country, not traveling and mooching around, being on trains and going to new places and going in and out of pubs and art galleries and museums and cathedrals, and not kind of knowing how everywhere is. So I'm going to read a couple of poems about places. The first one is called The Counties. And I wrote The Counties when I heard that the post office no longer wanted us to put the names of the counties when we wrote letters or postcards. Apparently this was a nuisance and they just wanted the post code. And I was reminded of that thing we all did when we were children of writing our name and address in our books and trying to make it as long as we possibly could. And I still have my very first copy of Alice in Wonderland. And when I open it, I should have brought it to show you actually. When I open up, I can see Carol Ann Duffy, 21 Poplar Way, Moss Pit, Stafford, Staffordshire, England, Great Britain, Europe, well, that's gone, the world, the universe, the solar system. My parents were Catholics, near God. And you really need the county in there to make it work. And the other thing that kind of annoyed me about this postcode thing was how poets love to name places in the poems. One of my favourite lyric poems is by Edward Thomas, his beautiful Adelstrop. I mean, that wouldn't work if it was a postcode, would it? Although it'd be interesting to find out what the postcode of Adelstrop was and play with that. So I quote Edward Thomas at the end of this poem, The Counties. But I want to write to an Essex girl, greeting her warmly. But I want to write to a Shropshire lad, brave boy, home from the army. And I want to write to the Lincolnshire poacher, to hear of his hair, and to an auntie in Bedfordshire who makes a wooden hill of her stair. But I want to post a rose to a Lancashire lass, red, I'll pick it. And I want to write to a Middlesex mate for tickets for cricket. But I want to write to the Ayrshire cheesemaker and his good cow. And it is my duty to write to the Queen at Berkshire in praise of Slough. But I want to write to the national poet of Wales at Ceredigion in celebration. And I want to write to the Dorset giant in admiration, and to the Inland Revenue in Yorkshire in desperation. But I want to write to my uncle in Clackmannanshire in his kilt, and to my scrumptious cousin in Somerset with her cidery lilt. But I want to write to two ladies in Denbighshire near Llangollen, and I want to write to a laddie in Lanarkshire, dear Lachlan. But I want to write to the Cheshire cat, returning its smile. But I want to write the names of the counties down for my own child, and may they never be lost to her. All the birds of Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. And of course, another place very dear to me is Liverpool. And this next poem, a sonnet, I gave first to the Liverpool Echo. And I was in Liverpool over the weekend of Hillsborough. I was staying in Mount Street near the cathedral, and I remember the cathedral ringing its bell all through the afternoon, enumerating the dead. And 25 years after that, I wrote this poem when the families finally achieved justice. Liverpool. The cathedral bell tolled, could never tell, nor the liver birds mute in their stone spell, or the Mersey, though seagulls wailed, cursed overhead, in no language for the slandered dead. Not the raw red throat of the cop keening, or the cop's words censored of meaning. Not the clock, slow hand clapping the coroner's deadline, or the memo to Thatcher, or the tabloid headline. But fathers told of their daughters, the names of sons on the lips of their mothers were prayers, lost ones honoured for bitter years by orphan, cousin, wife. Not a matter of football, but of life. Over this great city, light after long dark, and truth the sweet silver song of a lark. These poems I'm reading just now come from a collection called DBE. And in that book, the bee, unsurprisingly, I suppose, is a kind of presiding spirit in and amongst the poems. And of course, our bees globally are very much on the front line of the disasters we're inflicting on our planet. And already, in some parts of the world, I think initially in China, people are being employed to pollinate orchards because the bees are disappearing. So it was already a job when I wrote this poem in 2009. The Human Bee. I became a human bee at 12 when they gave me my small wand, my flask of pollen, and I walked with the other bees out to the orchards. I worked first in apples, climbed the ladder into the childless arms of a tree, and busied myself dipping and tickling, duping and tackling, tracing the petals' guidelines down to the stigma. Human, humming, I knew my lessons by heart. The ovary would become the fruit, the ovule the seed, fertilized by my golden touch, my Midas dust. I moved to lemons, head and shoulders lost in blossom, dawn till dusk, my delicate blessing. All must be docile, kind, unfraught for one fruit, pomegranate, lychee, nectarine, peach, the rhymeless orange. And if an opening bud was out of range, I'd jump from my ladder onto a branch and reach. So that was my working life as a bee, till my eyesight blurred. My hand was a trembling bird in the leaves, the bones of my fingers thinner than wands. And when they retired me, I had my wine from the silent vines, and I'd known love, and I'd saved some money, but I could not fly, and I made no honey. This next poem I think of as a resurrection poem. This is also from the Bees, and that collection begins with a poem of resurrection, a more public one about war, and ends with a personal one about my mother. And in this poem, I imagine that the very first time I meet my mother ever is at the moment of her death, when I was with her, and then the poem allows us to go back and reclaim our lives together, in a sense. Premonitions. We first met when your last breath cooled in my palm like an egg. You dead, and a bird outside sang it was morning. I backed out of the room, feeling the flowers freshen and shine in my arms. The night before, we met again to unsay unbearable farewells, to see our eyes brighten with re-strung tears. Oh, I had my sudden wish, though I barely knew you, to stand at the door of your house, feeling my heartbeat calm as they carried you in, home, home and healing. Then slow weeks, removing the wheelchair, the drugs, the oxygen mask and tank, the commode, the appointment cards, until it was summer again, and I saw you open the doors to the grace of your garden. Strange and beautiful to see the flowers close to their own premonitions, the grass sweeten and cool and green, where a bee swooned backwards out of a rose. There you were, a glass of lemony wine in each hand, walking towards me always, your magnolia tree, marrying itself to the May air. How you talked, and how I listened, spellbound, humbled, daughterly, to your tall tales, your wise words, the joy of your accent, un-English, dancey, humorous, watching your ash hair flare and redden, the loving litany of who we had been, making me place my hands in your warm hands, younger than mine are now. Then time, only the moon, the balm of dusk, and you, my mother. So, just bending down to get another book. I'm going to finish with two poems from the book I started with, Sincerity. And I hope everyone is doing as well as they can be and prepared to get through this next season, which we will do, but stick together, eh? And this poem is called Long Table, and it's a poem written about, I suppose, New Year, when I gather up in the Scottish Highlands with my friends and family every year. This year we won't be doing that. And we hire somewhere with one of those wonderful long dining tables and corrals. So I'll read this for all of you listening. Long table. It is a long table where the folks sit, supping their ale or sipping wine, friends of mine. They gather in shadow, candlelight, heads haloed as though painted in oils, singled all. Their voices lift and fall, a blare of merriment, a blur of soft prayer, beloved there. My green man, grey-haired now, yet mirthful in sorrow, as winter sun eases ice from trees. Our Lady of Good Cheer, garlanded, the flowers and leaves of the old year in her hair, and the lasses and lads whose faces flare brightest at the feast in uplift for youth's gift. Our dead waver outside, tethered by memory. Their own darkness is light seen too late. If they could live again, they would listen, even to silent drifting snow, its kind no. But the fire chortles here, rubbing its hands of flame, and we are carousing in rough song, blessed in the small hours where cold bites at the house, though cannot enter yet, and well met. And my final poem, and thank you so much for inviting me and for listening, and all my love to Liverpool, is a true story in that this actually happened to me, but then I took the incident and made a whole imaginative new life out of it, and was very amused both in the initial true incident and then where I took it. And I'll finish with this poem, The Monkey. One wrong turn, and I was in the piazza from hell, where a rogue clamped a small monkey onto my back. It groomed my hair gently as he grinned with one tooth demanding money, and the monkey swung round to nestle in my arms like a baby. Then the worst happened. I bonded. 500 quid later, back at the hotel, I schmoozed a travel crib from the concierge. The monkey loved its bath, splashed, played, but bit the toothbrush in half, then ran up the curtain. Once a mother, always. I crooned, perhaps I had a wicked childhood from the sound of music. And the monkey grew curious, quiet, crept closer. I tickled its soft back till it slept. There are good schools here. I have rented a pleasant house with a high walled garden, turned vegan. The monkey shows a real aptitude for finger painting, gym, percussion, and will sit quietly watching The Jungle Book while I work. I'm rewriting Esop's Fables from the point of view of the creatures, the world's woof. At night, toys tidied, all safe, house hushed. I sip my banana daiquiri and marvel at the possible. The road not taken, etc., the drunkenness of things being various, bright insights in the darkness, only poetry can align. As for my university professorship, I shall resign. All best wishes to the new laureate. The monkey is mine.
Carol Ann, it falls to me to thank you for a truly absorbing and thought-provoking reading. I enjoyed it hugely, and you've given our festival the best possible start. So on behalf of the whole of your audience this evening, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you to all of you, those who have been listening, and I hope to welcome you to many more events of our festival. So once more, thank you.